is being realized in America today. I see it in the scientists who are transforming the future. I see it in the parents who are nurturing generations to come, in the innovators and the educators, in everyone, everywhere, who is building a better life for themselves, their families, and their communities. This, too, is American aspiration. This is what President Joe Biden has called upon us to summon now. The courage to see beyond crisis, to do what is hard, to do what is good, to unite, to believe in ourselves, believe in our country, believe in what we can do together. Thank you, and may God bless America.
And now, John Legend.
So that was Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States of America, the first woman Vice President of the United States of America, the first woman of African descent, the first woman of Indian descent, who's now gone on to become and occupy the office of the Vice President of the United States of America. Kamala Harris there giving out a message of hope, stating that at this point of time, it is more important than ever before to stress on what unites the people of America rather than what divides the people of America. Let's also now take a quick look as to what is making headlines at this hour. US President Joe Biden has signed a string of executive orders. The actions include a face mask mandate on all federal property, a new White House office coordinating the response to the virus, and also a retraction and intent to remain a member of the World Health Organization. Besides this, he's also halted the controversial construction of the wall along with Mexico and has overturned the so-called Muslim ban in the United States.
A rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat.
And repeat after me.
US President Joe Biden has issued a strong rejection of white supremacy and domestic terrorism. In a speech, Joe Biden denounced, quote-unquote, racism, nativism, fear, demonization that has propelled the assault on Capitol Hill by an overwhelmingly a white mob of pro-Trump supporters on the 6th of January. China, meanwhile, has slapped sanctions against the outgoing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and 27 other top officials under Donald Trump. It has accused them of lying and cheating, and the move is being seen as a retaliatory measure. And world leaders congratulate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for successfully taking office. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, welcomed America back to the Paris Climate Accord, whereas Iran has slammed the diplomatic vandalism of Donald Trump and Pompeo and has now said that the United States can only fix itself in practice, and its words actually mean very little. But the Wall Street seems to be loving the new president. It has hit a new record high, and stock markets across the world have, of course, climbed up after the inauguration of US President Joe Biden. The Dow Jones and the Standard & Poor's 500 index posted all-time highs, but none gained more than the Nasdaq, which climbed well over 2% to a new record. All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour. There is a new president in the White House, and President Joe Biden wasted no time whatsoever in getting to work in the very first day of his office. The new president has signed 15 executive orders and 2 presidential memos.
Get to work immediately. As we've indicated earlier, we're going to be signing a number of executive orders over the next several days to week. And I'm going to start today. The compounding crisis of COVID, COVID-19, along with the economic crisis following that, and climate crisis, and racial equity issues, and some of the executive actions I'm going to be signing today are going to help change the course of the COVID crisis, and we're going to combat climate change in a way that we haven't done so far, and advance racial equity and support other underserved communities. We're going to rebuild our economy as well. And these are just all starting points. We're going to, in the process of rebuilding the economy, do what I said throughout the campaign and while running rebuild the backbone of the country, the middle class. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on that.
Now, in a bid to jumpstart the U.S. government's response to the coronavirus pandemic, Joe Biden has signed a string of executive orders intended to lead the country out of the worst health crisis that it has been witnessing in over a century. His first action included a compulsory mandate for wearing face masks for everyone on federal property and for federal employees. It is not a national mandate for everyone in the country to wear a face mask. It's only for the federal employees. He's also established a COVID-19 coordinator to oversee the White House's efforts to distribute vaccines. He's also halted the process of the United States of America withdrawing from the World Health Organization, as Donald Trump wanted to do. This is the United States has marked a total of 400,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, on the immigration front, there are some big changes that Joe Biden has brought in. The president has bolstered the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that protects immigrants who arrived in the United States as children from being deported. He's also revoked Donald Trump government's plan to exclude non-citizens from the census count. And he's also overturned another order that had pushed to find and deport unauthorized immigrants. And Joe Biden, within hours of taking office, has also overturned one of the most controversial executive orders that was pushed through by Trump. And this, of course, is the so-called Muslim ban, which had blocked travel to the United States from about 7 predominantly Muslim and African nations. Joe Biden has halted the construction of Donald Trump's pet project, and that is a border wall with Mexico. On the climate change front, President Biden has begun the process to re-enter the United States in the Paris Climate Accords. The United States will rejoin 30 days from now. A slew of Trump administration's environmental policies, including revoking the permit for Keystone Pipeline and reversing rollbacks to vehicle emission standards. He has also taken a series of steps to promote racial equality in the country. He has revoked Trump's executive order limiting the ability of federal agencies to hold diversity and inclusion training. He has also ordered all agencies to review and report on equity in their ranks within the next 200 days. The order moves to ensure that Americans of all backgrounds have equal access to federal government resources, benefits and services. Another executive order requires that the federal government does not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of how Joe Biden's presidency is going to be different from that of his predecessor and what challenges lie ahead for Joe Biden, we're joined in by Deepak Jaishankar. He's the director of the U.S. Initiative ORF Observer Research Foundation. Deepak, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And let me begin by asking you this. This, of course, is not going to be an easy task for the president who has come in, but he's got off the blocks pretty quick. He's passed 17 executive orders. What do you make of this?
Well, in some ways, a lot of what Donald Trump was able to accomplish was done by executive order. Rather by the other objective being possibly moving things through legislation, with something that would make things more permanent. So, for example, tax breaks was something that he did manage to get through the U.S. Congress, some trade agreements as well, including the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreements. But largely, Trump governed through executive order. And what we've seen Biden do on his first day in office, he's been in office for less than half a day at this point of time, is overturn a very large number of key policies, many of which are very dear to the Democratic base, by executive order, in some ways reversing this quite quickly. The other thing I think this indicates is in some ways the team around him. You have a very experienced team of people who had prior experience in the government, often in the Obama administration. So they know the mechanics of government, the legalities, what they can do, what they cannot do. And so that also was seen, that obviously a lot of preparation had gone into making sure that all of these were pushed through within hours of Joe Biden becoming president.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, in his message to the nation in the aftermath of him being sworn in as the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden said that it is time for the United States of America to heal and to unite. Now, at this point of time, many people have been looking at what is happening in the American democracy, and they are shocked. The President of the United States of America is hailed as the leader of the free world, but Joe Biden has a huge task in front of him of uniting a nation that's been deeply politically divided. How easy do you think this task is going to be for him?
Well, not very easy. I mean, I think the unity was clearly the major theme of his address, his inaugural address. It was, from his point of view, a very sort of passionate, personal speech in some ways, but also very consistent in terms of its themes. But that being said, 2 presidents ago, President Obama, under whom Biden served as vice president, also came to power on the theme of unity and gave very similar speeches, both in the run-up to his election and in the immediate aftermath, and found from the outset that there was a lot of resistance from Republicans on many big issues. There was a lot of stalling on major policies. In some ways, the Obama years saw greater divisiveness and political polarization take place, despite Obama's personal efforts in that way. So it is really an uphill struggle, I think, that Biden will face to see through again the rhetoric behind the unity. One of the key takeaways from what happened 2 weeks ago is really, in some ways, how a lot of Americans are living in a sort of parallel media universe in some way. So whether that message really gets through, whether people see that as sincere, whether that is really accepted by a lot of people remains to be seen.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, one of the key, policy objectives of Donald Trump during his presidency was to try and he was pulling out of a lot of these international agreements. He had walked out of the Paris Climate Accord, but Joe Biden has now overturned that. He wanted to walk out of the WHO, and Joe Biden has halted that. The question that I want to ask you is, how different will Joe Biden be on the foreign policy front? How different will his policy be with respect to China, for instance? How will he deal differently with, let's say, Iran? And do you think there will be a very large amount of difference in the way in which Joe Biden will conduct his foreign policy?
So I think on some matters, including, say, multilateralism, on immigration, on democratic cooperation, Biden will clearly have a very different worldview. The people around him have his own party has a very different view of the world. And I think that's already being seen. So in some ways, it'll be quite radically different from the last 4 years. But in other areas, for example, trade policy, on some of the alliance burden sharing, there is in some ways a hardening consensus in the U.S. that there needs to be a rebalancing in some of the U.S.'s international obligations. And so while he may not quite assume the tone of Donald Trump in some of these negotiations, some things will be quite similar. So, for example, when Biden speaks about trade benefiting the U.S. middle class, in some ways it's not that different in substance from what Trump has been advocating for. Now, when it comes to China specifically, and this is the big question, because a lot of other things, including policy towards India, will depend upon it. It does seem to be, based on the appointments that have been made so far, an indication that Joe Biden will actually continue with viewing China as a major strategic competitor. And in fact, already his cabinet nominees have indicated much the same in during the hearings following their nominations. So in some ways, we may still see a very competitive relationship with China, although the means of competition may change radically. So, for example, we expect more investment in research and development, in other ways of making the U.S. more competitive vis-a-vis China.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has, of course, tweeted congratulatory messages to the incoming president. Prime Minister Modi, we, of course, saw had a very good working relationship with the former presidents, both Barack Obama and also with Donald Trump. How do you see India-US equation under Joe Biden?
I would be at the outset reasonably positive. Again, almost everybody in key positions around Biden has had past experience dealing with India. Many of them worked on the India relationship in the Obama administration as well. Biden himself has been an enthusiast for the India relationship for 20 plus years. From the 1990s, when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he actually did a lot to get the U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement pushed through when important legislation was pending related to that. So I think at the outset it would be quite positive. The real question, I think, would basically be priorities. There are many domestic and foreign priorities that are pressing. And often, because India is not seen as a major problem, it tends to not rise up very high on the agenda early in an administration. I think the past 4 U.S. presidencies have all made major contributions to the relationship with India, but often later into their administration. So I think a little bit of patience is perhaps required, particularly over the next few months, as the Biden administration tackles the coronavirus pandemic, the economy, and even on the foreign policy front, some very pressing challenges. But I do think at the outset, I would be quite cautiously optimistic about the future of the U.S.-India relationship.
Absolutely. And the other big issue that I, of course, want to talk to you about is about Kamala Harris being now the Vice President of the United States of America. This indeed is chasing the big American dream. She is the daughter of an immigrant who went from the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu all the way to the United States. And Kamala Harris is now the Vice President of the United States of America, and she's broken many a glass ceiling. She's also the first woman to occupy the office of the Vice President, the first woman of color, of African descent and also of Indian descent to be occupying that office. How significant is breaking of this glass ceiling?
Well, I think this, as a symbolic moment, it is extremely significant. I would have to
stop you there because I'm being told that Barack Obama is addressing the nation. Let's listen into what Barack Obama has to say.
Disagreements, and yet recognize each other's common humanity, and that as Americans, we have more in common than what separates us.
I think if Americans would love their neighbor like they would like to be loved themselves, a lot of the division in our society would end.
That's what this means. It's a new beginning. And everybody needs to get off their high horse and reach out to their friends and neighbors and try to make it possible.
If, in fact, as George said, we're looking for what binds us together, the American people are strong, they're tough. They can get through hardship, and there's no problem they can't solve when we're working together. I think that was the theme of Joe's inaugural speech, and I think all of us discovered that we're at our best when we're all moving in the same direction.
America's a generous country with people with great hearts. All 3 of us were lucky to be the president of this country. Mr. President, I'm pulling for your success. Your success is our country's success, and God bless you.
I'm glad you're there, and I wish you well. You have spoken for us today. Now you will lead for us, and we're ready to march with you. Good luck. God bless you.
Joe, I'm proud of you, and you and Kamala need to know that you've got all of us here rooting for your success, keeping you in our prayers, and we will be available in any ways that we can as citizens to help you guide our country forward. We wish you Godspeed.
All right, so those were the
When our former presidents,
United States of America, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and also Bill Clinton, all of them stating that it is important for the United States of America to unite. And they also said that there is quite clearly a lot of hope that the Americans will be able to pull through of this crisis. Now, Deepak Jaishankar is still with me. We were talking about what this election actually means and how significant is this for the people of America, especially after the pretty tumultuous time under the Trump administration. But it is now Joe Biden who's in charge of the White House in Washington, D.C., and Deepak Jaishankar is joining me. is joining me from Washington, D.C. Dhruv, we were talking about the significance of Kamala Harris breaking through the glass ceiling. Although the United States happens to be such an old democracy, a woman has never occupied the top office in the United States of America. And Kamala Harris has now broken through a certain part of the glass ceiling. She's now the Vice President of the United States of America. And there are many firsts in the fact that she's now become the Vice President. And we were talking about the significance there. Go ahead, Dhruv.
No, I mean, I think the symbolic significance is immense. It's a really inspirational story. Her mother, coming as a young student to the United States from India, particularly at that time, marrying Kamala Harris's father, having two children, but then raising them as a single mother. Her life story in some ways is a great inspiration for a large number of Americans and for people around the world. Particularly women, particularly younger women, and particularly minorities in the U.S. I do think also that it's been interesting to see also the sort of very mixed reactions in India, great expectations on the one hand, and also sort of scrutiny about her. How much significance she will be giving to the India relationship. So, but I think it is in some ways a remarkable moment for the United States overall.
Absolutely, and we cannot not talk of what is going to happen to Donald Trump and how he'd be leading his life after having demitted from the White House. The president, we're given to understand, will be spending the next few days at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Do you think Donald Trump will still continue to remain very active in politics, or will he now fade away from here on?
Well, he still has a very large following. That's without doubt. A majority of Republicans think highly of him. His approval rating amongst Republicans remains high. Upon departure, it was about 35 to 40%. So I think questions will now be raised as to the future of the Republican Party, how much of a role Trump, both the person and sort of Trumpist ideology, will play a role in the Republican Party going forward. In some ways, there's sort of three scenarios that one can look at. One is Trump remaining active in politics, perhaps even trying to make another bid for the presidency, although the Senate trial that will follow in the next few days will have a say in that. The second is that he will remain a sort of a force behind the scenes, and that whoever does assume the mantle of the Republican Party going forward will require his blessings. And then a third possibility is, of course, that there is a sort of repudiation of Trump and Trumpism by the Republican Party. And it's sort of unclear sort of which of these will play out in the end. But I do think sometimes that, even though he's no longer the president, the fact is that he still has a very large following amongst a very large number of Americans.
Absolutely, indeed. So in the first few hours of Joe Biden's presidency, we saw him signing at least about 17 presidential executive orders there. He has overturned a lot of what Donald Trump, in fact, stood for. He's halted the construction of the wall along the Mexican border. He's also gone a little bit easy on the immigration front. He's overturned what was called the Muslim ban, where he had stopped travelers from predominantly 7 Muslim-majority nations. Besides this, he's done a whole host of other things, especially some of those pet projects of Donald Trump have now been upended. But the next 100 days for Joe Biden are going to be extremely critical. Joe Biden, during his campaigning, was unsparing of the shortcomings of Trump's presidency. But do you think the task ahead of Joe Biden is going to be easy, considering the crisis in the economy and health that the United States presently faces?
Well, the number one priority, I think, for the incoming administration, they've been quite clear about this. The most immediate priority is going to be the coronavirus pandemic, and how, on the good news for the U.S. is that they are sort of ahead of the curve a little bit on vaccines, although there's been a lot of problems with the implementation of the vaccine rollout to people. But the U.S. has had a bit of a head start on that. But that will be the number one priority. Obviously, the economy as well, and the implications there. So I think in the next 100 days that will be clearly the big priority. But already you're seeing signs of people in the administration thinking sort of a little long term. You're already seeing this in the statements that they're putting out, whether it's on foreign policy, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on sort of restoring democracy at home and around the world. So I think those will be some of the key issues that the Biden administration has said that they will focus on over the next year or two.
Indeed, Deepak Jaishankar, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and getting us all those insights. This, of course, is going to be an extremely crucial time for the United States of America and indeed for the rest of the world. We'll, of course, be tracking all the developments, but we'll slip into a short break. More news and updates will continue on the other side, but we'll also be leaving you with what is happening at the inauguration celebrations that are presently still underway in Washington, D.C.
WION now available in the United States. Download the app now.
One World Trade Center, that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Work in progress.
From the world's most volatile region, conflicts over faith and boundaries. Stories of death, destruction, despair, and hope. WION brings you to the heart of the action. Incisive analysis, unrivaled perspective, and exclusive ground reports. Watch West Asia Post every Friday, 8:30 p.m. IST with me, Radi Francis, only on WION. World is one.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views, and analysis. WIONews.com. World is one.